Good evening, and welcome to Making Learning Addictive. I am your host, Brian Romero Smith. It is a Wednesday. This is, oh my goodness, it's June 15th already. Lord have mercy. Well, it's hot outside in Texas, and we may be talking about something that may get people a little heated in tonight's conversation, but it's all good. To be honest with you, tonight's conversation came about as we were evaluating parenting. And as many of you know, I have a 20-year-old who will be 21 next month, one who just turned 18. And then, of course, I've got two others that we call the Mocha Minor and Mocha Major, of course. But this has been a trying couple of years. And as I said before, I'm not a cursor. But a couple of years ago, there was this gentleman that walked up to me and he asked me, was I a cursor? And I told him, no, I'm not. And he says, you know what? I would like you better if you were. And it was like really shocking to me, but it caused me to think about that particular statement. There must be some value that people see in their ability to converse with someone who also swears. And I found this article that talked about swearing is usually regarded as simply lazy language. This is kind of how I viewed it. However, according to Emma Byrne, I think that's her name, she actually has some research that talks about the positive virtues that are promoting trust and teamwork in an office. It helps to increase our tolerance for pain if profanity is used. Now, what's funny about that is I had this conversation back in Miami a couple of years ago with a friend of mine who I'm about to bring on here right now. Hello, Marlena. How you doing? You're
Okay. Hey, my friend.
Well, I'm bringing him up to this conversation that we had down in Miami a couple of years ago. And you like blew my mind when you said that you allowed your kids to curse. I was
Yep.
shocked. I was real shocked. And then, ladies and gentlemen, you guys know me. Um, you probably could tell what my face actually looked like. I talk about how I raise my kids all the doggone time. But as I said before, I've started to let a couple of words slip myself as I'm going through what I call teenage treason. It's kind of what I call it. This teenage treason. But I felt guilty, when I used it. Now, my kids hear it all the time. So I begin to think, okay, did Marlena have something with this? I don't know. So, ladies and gentlemen, I called, I connected with her. I said, hey, I need you to come on and talk about this because I need some education as I continue to look at this research. But I think there's something to this. So I need to be schooled tonight. Is that okay?
That's okay. I'm happy to help.
All right. Well, first of all, let everybody know who you are and what you're all about.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me back again, Brian. I love our conversations. And I remember with crystal clarity how amazing that conversation was in Miami. It was actually right before COVID actually kind of hit. I think it was in
Right.
that same school year.
Yeah.
But I'm Marlena Gross-Taylor, founder of Gladiators, and it's more than just a chat on Twitter. We do all kinds of things, provide PD, as well as help teacherpreneurs and anyone that is wanting to teach others how to do something, right? And helping educators really that may not be the largest following or anything like that, help them still have an impact. And
Mm.
so it's amazing because we've talked a little bit since COVID, like right at that when we were at that conference and having dinner. And then this comes up, and I'm the first person you call because curse words have a strong message. They leave a strong impression. And so I cannot wait to talk about that and how it works into parenting.
Okay. Well, let's just talk about the power because, I have read that when people are freely allowed to express themselves using profanity, which is taboo in many people's lifestyles and their own personal cultures. But there is a sense of power that comes with you know being able to use that type of language. Can you you know give us something about that? I mean, help me with that.
Absolutely. So, for those of you that may know me, of course, I'm an educator. That is at the heart of what I do. But before going into education, before I knew that I wanted to do that, or decided, I should say, I always knew I wanted to be a teacher, probably. But my undergrad is in psychology, particularly in adolescent psychology, adolescent behavior, I should say, and geriatrics. So I knew I would work with one of those two groups, and both can curse a lot, right? So there's some connections there. But to answer your question, when we curse, the reason why it leaves such an impression and the reason why it has some benefits that I'd love to just share as well is that it allows us to express ourselves in the moment without any type of barriers, without any type of um, maybe social cues that we've been taught, like what to do, what not to do, those types of things. When you say a curse word and it is coming from your soul, you are your most authentic self
Hmm.
in that moment. And a lot has to do with the research in our brain about what cursing actually activates. There's quite a bit of research now coming out about how cursing is a sign of lots of things, but in this particular question, it's also a sign of a creativity, because it actually triggers the right side of our brain. And some of this research was realized when we had doctors and scientists studying patients that have strokes, because strokes tend to affect the left side of the brain, right? Like that's how you know if you feel a tingling in your arm, if you're at a high risk or age, you need to get checked out, right? If it's in your left arm, because it affects, for the most part, your left side. So people that have had strokes and it impacts your speech and movement, they still can cuss. So it really has led down this happy rabbit hole of all kind of sparkle words is what I tend to call them, because I did teach middle school, of how it actually helps us communicate very clearly. There's no doubt in anyone's mind when somebody is shouting out a cuss word, and or hopefully not cussing at you, but if you have been on the receiving end of a cuss word, you know exactly in that moment the level of emotion and what
Mhm.
emotion. And I'll end this little piece right here. And maybe, Brian, this happened to you. Picture it, you're in the store, you're in the grocery store, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And for whatever reason, your mom or your dad or grandma, Lord help you if it's the grandmother, lets you push the buggy and they're walking in front, and you hit the back of their heel with that buggy. 9 times out of 10, that adult, whoever it is going to say a sparkle word that leaves no doubt in your mind that you literally effed up, right? Like you made a mistake and you need to duck and cover, right? This is how strong and powerful cuss words, sparkle words can be.
Okay. All right. Now I have a lot to say to that. Now, yes, that example is real, just like stubbing your toe in the middle of the night, getting up trying to get a drink of water, going to the bathroom. However, you mentioned the creativity aspect. So, are people, psychologically trying to find a colorful word to express themselves in the name of creativity? Or is it more creative to find another adjective to explain the pain that you're actually going in?
Well, I think it's both and, right?
Okay.
So there's about 5 huge benefits of cussing.
Okay.
And one is
I'm gonna
that
write
it
these
is,
down.
yeah, and in no particular order, okay? But one is it's a sign of creativity because of what you just said in either way, because that ties into one of another benefit of cussing. which is it's a sign of intelligence. Now, I'm from the South, in the bayou, deep in the boot. And, there are some, especially in the South, like it's not proper to cuss.
Hmm.
And like you said, lazy cussing, or it makes us appear ill-educated or rude or untrustworthy, or maybe your
Hmm.
mama just said there's no cussing in my house, right? Like
Right.
that happens
Right.
too. But it actually is a sign of intelligence and creativity for both of those things, because people that generally have a good grasp on cussing also
Mhm.
have a good grasp on English language, right? And it's not just for English, actually. It actually, this phenomenon is seen across languages, across cultures, because no matter what culture you're in, there are certain cuss words that are universal. We may say them slightly different. And even if you're not sure of that language, if someone cusses at you or around you in that language, you can pretty much use your context clues to know what they're saying.
Right.
So it's really about having a good grasp on the human language, on the English language, on language acquisition, and or it helps you be creative if you are taught, like, I can't cuss, right? I can't cuss in this situation. So I have to think of something else that can give me that same emotional, or as close as possible to that same emotional impact of the word that I really want to say. Because kids start cussing at around 6 years old.
Right.
Some younger, like mine, that's what I was telling you about at dinner,
We're gonna get to
and
that.
telling the group, but they start cussing pretty young. But that's when they start really having a firm grasp on language, whatever that language might be for them, right? Whether it's English or Spanish, French, whatever it is that you might speak. Um, so that those two benefits, it's a sign of intelligence. So we're kind of debunking that myth that it's lazy,
Mhm.
because it's not. It's also a sign of creativity, because when you cuss, the it releases a response in the right side of your brain, and that right side is your creative side, as well as bringing you into the third benefit. um, it improves your tolerance for pain. So follow me here. So when we cuss, we produce a stress response, right? Like, or I'm sorry. When we cuss, we produce a stress response, because when we are in pain, we are producing a response, a reflex. Sometimes it depends on what it is that your body's saying, like, "Hey, I'm in pain, I'm hurting." Well, when we cuss, it actually ignites the adrenaline that races to our heart, and to our breathing, that fight or flight mode, right?
Uh-huh.
And it
Uh-huh.
actually helps us process that pain in an instant much better than had we not cussed. Like, even if we said shoot instead of, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, that is not going to have the same release of adrenaline, and it's not going to have the same release of the stress response that our body naturally does. Like, fight or flight is like, this is like caveman talk, right? Like, this is something that
Mhm.
is innate in all of us, and it allows us to process that pain very quickly, and then think about what are our next steps, right? Like, whatever that might be, depending on the situation that made you say a sparkle word to begin with. So when we think about the benefits of cussing, when we think about mental health and wellness, they really all kind of fit in together,
Mhm.
because it is a sign of intelligence. It activates a part of our brain that houses our creativity. And when we do that, especially if we are cussing in response to when we are in pain, especially physical pain, like the example that I gave and the one
Uh-huh.
that you shared. And for those of you that may not have that experience, any parents stepped on a Lego lately,
Oh, yeah,
or
absolutely.
a car, like the little cars? Anytime you do that, when you cuss, it immediately triggers a response to help you process and move on.
Okay. So I'm imagining what my mom is saying right now. Uh, you know, as growing up Christian, right?
Mhm.
You know, using expl- bad words, we used to call it. Even shut up was a bad word, in the house. Anything
Yes.
that came close to, you know, uh,
Yes.
the thought of it being a negative connotation was not allowed, in the home. However, as soon as we walked out the door, that's all you heard,
Mhm.
right? So as a kid, I had to process what I've been taught in the home of what not to say, but and at the same time process what was acceptable, outside of the home in the street. If I did not speak in that particular manner, I was not accepted, and vice versa. If I spoke in the street manner at home, that would not be accepted. Now, going back to that conversation in Miami about allowing your children to curse, how did that come about at that age, though, for that to be acceptable?
Well, so it's all about, we have to have social norms. That's how we can live together and respect each other's space, right? And being. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with having social norms and having with anything. Too much of anything is bad for you, right? Like you drink even too much water, that is
Okay.
bad for you,
Which I'm
right?
missing right now.
So the impact of cussing or mojitos, depending on where you are, the impact of cussing, if you cuss too much, then the benefits reduce greatly, right?
Okay.
So having those social norms is not a bad thing. We don't want kids or adults to only use cuss words, right? Because then that diminishes the positive benefits that are there from cussing.
Okay.
Um, for my own children, I think about my own upbringing, very similar to yours. I remember when my mom, and if she, well, when she watches this, because I'm gonna send it to her because it's funny. When I remember her before she found Jesus, is how I phrase it. And I remember specifically my older brothers, my older brothers were getting in trouble for something, and she just let loose a string of sparkle words, right? But it was before she found the like officially found the Lord. So she has done a lot better now, of course. But I remember that. And I remember thinking, like, okay, so there's a time and a place. My mom didn't allow it. Yet when I would go to my grandmother's, her mother had tried to change her ways, if you will. Not that there was anything wrong with it, but the social norms were that. And so she rarely would cuss, but she would say other words with the same emphasis as a cuss word. And that was like her kind of modification of that. My dad's mom, though, she didn't mind. She would let you know exactly how she felt, and especially if it wasn't in a very formal setting like church or something like that. Oh, she would cuss. So I kind of, much like you, I grew up with that, and that's not even counting like going to school and riding the bus, where you learn
Right.
all the
The
things on the
bus,
bus,
the
right?
locker room.
So I had to like really like grapple, like we all have had to do, like all kids do when they're learning languages. What can I say? What can I say? When is the right time? When is the right place?
Mm.
In my situation, my grandmother, my dad's mother, they were still alive when I had kids. And so they kept my kids while I was, teaching. And so my grandmother, they heard it from her. My oldest son had a better, I think, that's just who he is, a better understanding of the protocols, if you will, or the norms. But my youngest, he was literally an infant, I guess, and he just liked it. It just sounded good. It's like a foreign language, right?
Okay.
Except it
Okay.
wasn't so foreign. So he actually started cussing, repeating, parroting, which is a key piece of language acquisition,
Right.
my grandmother, but at inopportune times when it wasn't necessarily socially acceptable in public places or what have you. So his dad and I had to have a conversation around like, what are we going to do with Colin? Like, he can't say these cuss words. So there's a couple of ways we can handle as parents, lots of things. You got to pick your hill you want to die on. For me, cussing wasn't a hill I wanted to die on, like not having them cuss. But there were other things, right? Like we don't smoke. I don't smoke. I hate it. I won't do it. I never want my kids to do it. Like that is a hard no for me.
Okay.
Cussing, I can give a little bit. I also knew the research around it too.
Okay.
So then it becomes a teaching moment with me teaching him and brother how to, this is my youngest son, when and where, and to give guardrails. Because as
Okay.
parents, especially now, we don't give our kids guardrails. And I'm speaking in broad terms. We like to tell them exactly what to do without allowing them to make mistakes. That's a whole nother story. I wanted to give him guardrails. So as he was reaching that age of, 5 and 6, and started saying it more, which is aligned to the research, I told him, I said, Colin, okay, here's the deal. You can only say 3 words per month. 3 words per month. And you can't say mom's favorite sparkle word, which is the F word. That's my favorite word. Don't judge me.
All right, no judgment.
So with that, he was like, okay. So I'm giving him guardrails and also saying, you can't cuss at school. You'll get in trouble. That's not acceptable. You can't cuss in church or you'll go to hell. That's not acceptable. And no, you can't cuss around like your grandparents, like my mom, and so forth. So you can't do that, right? So he had guardrails around that, but he stuck to the three a month. And I told his brother, you're going to be his accountability partner. And they're like in first, second grade when we're
Wow.
having this conversation. And as we're going through it, and a little time had passed, and then Colin was playing. They're both playing video games. Colin used it appropriately. I was very impressed as he was losing on his video game, what he shouted out. And his brother, telling like, Colin, I can hear from the room, Colin, that's number 2. You have 2 weeks left. That's number 2. And at the dinner table in this particular moment, as we were talking about it, I was saying to my oldest son, Daniel, like, Daniel's really good. Daniel asked me, he said, well, Mom, how come Colin can cuss and I can't? Which is another parenting dynamic we all have to work through if we have multiple kids.
Right.
And I shared with him, I said, well, it's not that you can't. I said, it doesn't seem to be your thing, and that's okay. But I would never treat you exactly the same because you're different. You're different people. You're different humans.
That's good parenting.
I said, plus, you suck at it.
Yeah.
Like, you're a horrible cusser.
Wait. Okay, so there's people who can cuss and people who can't cuss very well. Is that what you're saying?
With all things, there are people that can cook really well, and there are people that you're going to be moving the food around on the plate, right? Waiting for them to look the other way.
Okay.
So Daniel was like, well, no, I don't. I can cuss really well. I mean, they're like in first and second grade, respectively. And so we're at dinner, and I'm like, okay, say a word, but you can't say my word because I wanted to give guardrails, right? Like, you can't say my word, but say a word. So he hollers out a cuss word, and it has no context. It's not related to any like type of pain, like stubbing his toe or anything like that. We burst out laughing at the table, the whole family. And his dad told him, you're super witty. Just go with that. You don't need to cuss. You're super witty. Right. And so this is how it like transitioned. And honestly, this is what kept him in those guardrails. And if I had to look at the two of them, Colin is way chill. And a lot of that is because that emotional release that cussing brings. Now, there are times where I'm like, Colin, and I'll have to holler out as they became teenagers and playing the video games, especially. I'm like, you got one more left, and older brother Daniel's still like, oh, he used them already, and keeping them accountable. But it's really about giving them a way to de-stress and or to deal with things. The fourth benefit of cussing is that it replaces violent physical acts. See, we don't even talk about the research on that. Right. But it replaces violent physical acts. I have boys that I'm raising at that time, young men now. They're Black, growing up in the South. Like, there's just some things they cannot do in response to certain stimuli from the environment. I'll put it like that. Mm-hmm. But the research is very clear that cussing actually can replace violent acts. Think about road rage. Think about when someone cuts you off, right? Now, I try not to have road rage, and I'm pretty chill, like, okay, whatever, keep going, But for people that have road rage, right, and they're cussing, imagine if they didn't cuss. But wait, we don't have to imagine, because there are instances that have been caught on our phones now when people didn't just cuss, or maybe they didn't stop at that and they went to physical acts, right? So when I think about like the issues we have in our schools about whether it's, self-harm, whether it's, school shootings, unfortunately, we know we just went through this, whether it's the adults as well, like engaging in those two things, as far as like mass shootings or self-harm, it really boils down to self-regulation. We don't teach kids how to regulate their emotions. I gave my kids a really simple way that was like, here are your guardrails, because like, here's your guardrails. But it was teaching them to do other things instead of reacting in a physical way. Now, I'm not going to say cussing is the cure for all things,
Right.
right? But how many people don't even let their kids cuss?
Yeah. Yeah. So I asked this question of my daughter, my oldest, um, who has just finished her junior year at OU. For those that get OU confused, it's University of Oklahoma. Um, and she said that if she was allowed to curse, she might not feel as awkward in talking to me. Blew my freaking mind.
She said she might not feel as awkward talking to you.
Yes. She
Huh.
because it was just a no no. I was conditioned that it's just a no no. You know, and I raised my children in this do as I do and as I say. So I didn't watch a lot of movies. I didn't watch very many movies at all that had cursing in it. Didn't listen to a lot of music with cursing. I didn't listen to any music with cursing in it, at all. But I found myself having to gravitate towards it as my kids got older and what they were exposed to when they were outside of my home, right? But it was still a no no, but it was so acceptable everywhere they went, where to the fact that home was uncomfortable. And I didn't get that. Here's another reason why I reached out, because I didn't get that. I'm trying to set what I felt was healthy boundaries in teaching my kids how to communicate effectively, how to articulate themselves professionally. Um, and instead, I wasn't meeting them where they were in their normal surroundings, because they spent more time outside of the house than they did at that table when we had most of our conversations. So I'm just like, okay, I need to find out more, about this. So I appreciate the research, behind this, because it makes sense, and the more that I've read on it, um, you're hitting on the same points that I've seen in the research that I've begun to curate. Um, but there was one article that I read that was written by a lady who her husband did not agree with this philosophy. Right? They caught their 6-year-old watching a cartoon, and the cartoon character was hit by an anvil. It was a Looney Tunes cartoon, and the kid yelled out, "OF." And that was the dad's fear. Now, you started young with your kids. Did they ever have a time where they released the word out in public? And how did you respond, if so?
Yeah. So Colin cussed in church when he was younger before we set the
I really
three
like Colin,
words a
though.
month. He cussed, and all of his friends know this, right? Like I tell this story because it's important. I think so. Yes, we got to get guardrails, right? I think like what you share, and I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing that, because we don't really talk about parenting enough. Like we talked about it a lot that night,
Mm-hmm.
at dinner with a whole group of us, but we don't talk about that enough about parenting tips, especially as Black people. We just
Right.
don't, and we really should,
Mm-hmm.
because what you shared leads to the fifth benefit that I have of cussing is honesty. And for your daughter to say that she didn't feel like she could really talk to you, sometimes the words that we need to say, we can't find the right word that conveys the level of emotion that we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to convey. And sometimes a cuss word is the only thing that can do that. Sometimes saying that one word when you're, not in pain or anything like that, but you're trying to communicate, can communicate so much in that one word, as well as, providing a space that says honesty. Like for me doing that with my boys, and so I would try to reiterate that. you can talk to me about anything. Like, I'm not going to judge you. I'm very much do as I say and as I do, as well as understanding that I need to have this space where they can talk, because if it's not an honest, safe place, they'll never tell me when they need to, right? They'll never tell me about that. And so not only was everyone at our house, because I cooked, because I know how to get to boys as well, being Southern, if I have a meal, all their friends are going to come
Yeah, there you
over.
go.
But during that time, and I know some of them came from households where they couldn't curse, or their parents would be upset if they did, right? And a lot of their parents I was friends with, and they knew that I told this story about Colin all the time, is that they would tell me things they weren't even telling their parents.
Yeah.
Because and even one in particular, I'm looking at Michael right now. He would try to say things and say, "You just want me to cuss at you, but I'm not," right? Like, it created this whole sense of acceptance and community.
Wow.
If one of them let one slip out, it wasn't like, "Oh my gosh, what did you say?" No.
Yes.
Right? It just created this whole sense of community, that you can say what you need to say. Don't cuss at me, because you will get punched in the throat, right? Like, don't ever do that. Like, let's not be dumb. But like, if you're cussing because you're frustrated, or you're trying to figure out what to say, or you're happy and you're excited, like, there's nothing wrong with that, because sometimes those are the right words.
Yeah.
It's really about us as parents and as the adults, again, putting those guardrails around so they can express themselves if they choose. And my oldest is still not a cusser. Like, even at graduate, like, he just graduated from the Naval Academy. And I mean, he said a cuss word because his friends were around. I was like, bro, you sound so dumb. Like, just stick with not cussing. Right. And his friends were laughing, and, and they're just like, oh my gosh, like, yes, like, that's just not his thing. Right. And so he doesn't do it often, even still to this day. But we have a relationship, and as friends, they know it. Like, this is how you do it. Don't do it too much, but
Right.
also it's okay if you do. And I think that is the key to building, to building relationships. And I want to speak to one thing you said about, like, how your music changed, and even, maybe some of your TV choices. So as parents, I think the worst thing we can do is shut off what we want our kids to watch, because they're going to do it anyway.
Right.
Right. Like you said, they're out and about more than they are at home. And that time increases as they get older. Find out what they're watching.
Yeah.
Watch it with them. Talk about it.
Yeah.
One show that I hated initially that the boys watched, I still don't love it, but it is kind of funny. Boondocks.
Yeah.
For so many reasons, even though Uncle Ruckus, like, cracks me up. And I remember when they were talking about it and Colin was watching it, and I would make their dad, like, watch Family Guy and all that. I was like, I just don't like that kind of stuff. Like, I like Hallmark Channel and sci-fi, right? And then Boondocks happened, and then their dad was like, oh my gosh, like, this is too much. Now, they were older, they're in middle school. This is too much. Like, I can't do this one. So I watch it with them. Freaking hilarious. Of course, I really said this is effing hilarious as we're watching it together. But we talked about some of the themes that they were talking about in that cartoon is very, very real. Especially what Black kids go through, and Black people and Black boys growing up go through. So it led to this whole thing, like, oh my gosh, I can watch this with my mom, right? Yeah. And then I was able to share my favorite movie, Pulp Fiction, because it says my favorite word about 250 times.
Yes, okay.
Right? Samuel Jackson is the master.
Yes, that was my turnaround.
Like, for real, right? We're able to connect. I'm able to connect with my kids in a way that I couldn't do before. Had I been so, don't cuss, don't say this, don't do that.
Yeah. Yes. I agree with you 1,000%. And it was Samuel Jackson that, allowed, us to be able to sit down. Because one, it gave us the opportunity to provide a safe space within our own home for us to have that conversation around this colorful language. I like to call it colorful. And Samuel Jackson is the master of it. There's not a movie that he doesn't get an MF in. Even when he's playing a cartoon character, they bleep it out at the last minute. But with that being said, I started to learn that when I judged different things that had cursing in it because I felt that I couldn't tolerate it, I missed out on the art, the storytelling, you know, um, the ability to express themselves in a way that, as you said before, they may not be able to do with the regular language. Let's just say it, keep it at that. Um, for example, Eminem. I was not a fan of Eminem. I just couldn't stand the language, and people would talk about his mastery. Not only how he did things sonically, but how he put words together to create a message that was beyond the normal way of thinking. I missed all of that because I was blinded by the my inability to accept the cursing. And once I stopped being so doggone judgmental, just put it that way, you
Mm-hmm.
know, my mind was open and my eyes were open to the beauty of the music behind all of that. It wasn't about the cursing, and I made it about the cursing. And I don't want it to be that for other parents. It's not about the cursing. One, building relationships with your kids. It is critical that you accept all of them unconditionally. And kids are going to pick up things that may not necessarily come from us. Right now, they're inundated with a ton that's on social media. The gram
Mm-hmm.
is the Bible for many folks, and what they see may not be what you may want them to see initially. But as you said before, if you get down on the ground with them, and talk about the things that they're seeing and allow them to explain why they like it, what is it that they like about it, and then you help the interpretation of it, you're opening up the opportunity for that door to be continuously open for your kids to have conversations with you where they don't feel that you're judging them or you're dismissing the way that they are thinking. You know, we raise our kids either how we were raised or what we didn't like about how we were raised, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the
Mm-hmm.
reality is, our kids aren't us.
Mm-hmm.
They live in a totally different world.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't stop trying to raise our kids for a future that's based on our past, we're going to miss their right now. So, Marlene, I appreciate this conversation, to the utmost.
Well said. I mean, it's about human connection. It always
Yeah.
is. It's about human connection. And I think about when I was a principal, and if I had kids that were getting in trouble or kids that were, I mean, I've used this 3 words a month for kids that struggle with self-regulation, but they do
Mhm.
express themselves when they're, reaching a point. I've used that as a strategy in teaching and behavior management. But if when I was a principal and I would have kids coming in, they're hot, maybe they were about to fight, or they're, upset, or people were talking about them, or they saw something on social media, right?
Mhm.
And they would tell me, and they would use cuss words as they're telling me, how they're feeling, as I'm asking, like, hey, what happened? What's going on? I'm not gonna hold it against that kid that
Yeah.
they were cussing, you know? I didn't cuss around my kids at school as like when I was a principal or a teacher, but we talked about cussing and about sparkle words and about acceptance and the guardrails and all the things, and had these conversations. I'm not gonna hold that against them. Wait, you're cussing in front of me because I'm the principal? I just wanted them to get that emotion out, because until they calm down, they're
Right.
never gonna hear what
Right.
I am
Right.
trying to share with them,
Right.
or a resolution that we can try to find together.
Excellent. That's that's brilliant. I hope some of our leaders are listening to that, because that actually will also keep us calm
Yep.
and we don't react in anger because sometimes we get upset when a kid cusses at us and we take it personal, but it's really just them letting out their frustration and tapping into their emotions. um, and we probably can keep a lot of kids out of in school suspension or out of school suspension, if we allow for that freedom of expression, because you're right, they will calm down real soon
Mhm.
once they let it
Once
out.
they get it out,
Once they
right?
get it out. Once they get it
Once
out.
they get it out, fight or flight. See, when they're cussing, they're going fight or flight. So you got to make sure that they're in a safe place so they don't feel that they have to leave.
Man. Marlene, I really appreciate you.
So look, Brian, I got to share this really quick. So
Okay.
if you are, for all your listeners, if you want to learn more about the impact of swearing and our sparkle words, cussing, whatever you might call it, it was Emma Byrne, Byrne. Byron, am I saying that right? Byrne.
You're talking about the person who wrote the swearing is.
Swearing is good for you.
Yes. Emma. I think it's Byrne.
Is it Byrne?
Byrne.
I've always said Byrne.
Okay.
Great book.
Mm-hmm.
Great book. Grab it. Parents, leaders, educators, you need to read it.
Okay.
And, or if you prefer things in video format, that's totally fine. If you have Netflix, because who doesn't have Netflix, especially, as we're coming out of the pandemic, Nicolas Cage narrates a series called Swear Words. And
Really?
he takes each major swear word that we say, and it's super engaging and entertaining how it's all put together. I think he's one of the producers behind it, if I remember correctly. But he breaks down each episode, 30 minutes on Netflix, and they pick a different swear word, and they talk about the history. They talk about how it started. Many of these things started like in Victorian times,
Really?
that we know of, where it's written, where we can say like here. I'm sure it started with Adam and Eve, probably. Let me tell you. But
yeah, after she bit that apple,
right.
He probably said some stuff.
Sure. But it's called Swear Words. It talks about it, and it talks about how it impacts and how it's made it to its way to still be used today, and how it impacts how we think and feel. So if you want to read it, Swearing is Good for You by Emma Byrne. If you want to watch it, Netflix, Swear Words with Nicolas Cage narrating.
Wow. Once again, thank you for being a repeat guest, for me. This was highly educational and entertaining at the same time. And it's funny how I remember that conversation like it was yesterday, as well.
Probably said some swear words.
Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for joining us once again tonight, be it live or if you're listening to us on replay. Make sure you check out those articles, and I'll those references. I will tweet them. I can't speak. It's the Bell palsy. Blame it on the Bell palsy. The book by Emma Byrne, and then I'll find the Netflix link for folks who have Netflix. Make sure you're not borrowing somebody else's account, because they are banning that right now. So make sure you get your own. Pay your little $12, whatever it is. But with that being said, I'll tweet those out so you can actually use it as a reference as well. And maybe we can come back to this conversation before school begins, as we begin to talk about a lot of this discipline data, which usually is a part of those PD conversations before school begins. So that'll be pretty dope. So keep that in the back of your mind. All right. So next week, ladies and gentlemen, we'll actually have our ISTE review. Preview, so to speak. So if you're going to ISTE and you actually want to preview your session so people can actually join you while you're there, make sure you hit me up on Twitter. You can DM me, or you can actually email me at brian@brianromerosmith.com if you want to be on the show. We do have a couple of slots available, maybe about four or five slots available for that week. So that'll be June 20th through the 23rd, Monday through Thursday. We'll see you at ISTE, or we'll see you next week. Later.